She walked in alone, not because she had nobody, because she had never once needed someone beside her to tell a room who she was. Elena Vance, 52 years old, silver locks pinned in an elegant upswept style, with two loose pieces framing a face that had earned every line on it. Deep crimson off-shoulder gown, fitted through the body, floor length, a single slit to the knee that suggested rather than announced. Diamond studs catching the chandelier light. A silk clutch held in hands that had never once trembled when it mattered. She looked like a woman who got dressed for herself and happened to leave the house. The ballroom noticed her before she had taken 10 steps. Not because of who she was with, because of who she was. Chloe Park noticed her too, from across the room, champagne bottle already in hand. In the specific way insecure people notice the person they cannot categorize, cannot outshine, cannot explain. Chloe moved through the crowd. Elena saw her coming and did not move, did not adjust, did not prepare a single thing except her stillness. Chloe stopped directly in front of her, looked her up and down with the slow, deliberate cruelty of a woman who had weaponized beauty since she was old enough to understand its power. Then she raised the bottle and poured, slowly, deliberately, every drop, over Elena's silver locks, down her face, across the deep crimson gown. The ballroom went absolutely silent. Elena did not gasp, did not step back, did not look down at the champagne spreading across her gown. She opened her silk clutch, removed a handkerchief, ivory, monogrammed, soft from 100 launderings, and patted her face dry, with hands that did not tremble. Then she looked at Chloe. Not with anger, with something far more devastating than anger. The recognition of a woman who has seen this particular kind of smallness before and is not remotely surprised by it. Money can buy you that dress, child. She tucked the handkerchief back into her clutch. But it clearly couldn't buy you a soul. From the mezzanine above, Yunpo descended the stairs, crossed the ballroom, looked at Chloe once, just once, and let go of her hand permanently. He took Elena's hand instead. His thumb traced her knuckles, these steady, unshaking knuckles, with the reverence of a man touching something rare. I have spent my life looking for a queen, he said quietly, loud enough for every silent person in that silent room to hear. I did not realize she would have stars in her hair. Elena raised one eyebrow. And I did not realize I would spend my evening being accosted by children. She tucked her clutch under her arm, turned back to the room, began a conversation with the person beside her as if none of it had happened. Yunpo stood in the middle of that ballroom and watched her walk away from him. From him. The man nobody walked away from. And felt something he had not felt since he was a boy. The specific, uncontrollable need to be in every room that woman was standing in. For the rest of his life. Elena Vance just stood in a silent ballroom, with champagne dripping down her crimson gown, and did not flinch once. If you were Elena, what would you have done in that moment? And gentlemen, if you were Yunpo watching from that balcony, what would you have done next? Tell me in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching Christy J story from tonight. Subscribe and hit that bell. Let us get back to Elena. The morning after the gala, Elena's doorstep told a story. 12 dozen white roses arranged with the precision of someone who had sent people to find the best florist in the city at 6 in the morning. A jewelry box containing something that belonged in a museum. A card, cream paper, precise handwriting, 4 words. Name your price. I will pay it. Elena stood in her doorway in a silk robe and reading glasses with her morning coffee and looked at all of it. Then she went inside, found the number on the card, called it. Yunpo answered before the second ring. Fix the potholes on 5th Street, she said. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the roses or the jewelry or the grand gesture of the card. The children at my youth center have been tripping over them for 2 years. The city will not act. You have people. Use them for something worth doing. She hung up. She sent the jewelry back. Kept one rose. Not for him. Because it was simply a beautiful rose, and she had always loved white roses. And she refused to let a grand gesture ruin a perfectly good flower. She got dressed, dark tailored trousers, a fitted ivory blouse, reading glasses pushed up in her locks, and drove to the youth center. By noon, 5th Street was being repaved, a crew that appeared without permits and would finish before dark. Working with the specific, efficient purpose of people who had been given clear instructions by someone whose instructions were never questioned. Elena stood at the youth center window and watched. She did not smile. She nodded once. The nod of a woman whose requests had always been reasonable and whose patience for them being ignored had simply run out. Yun-poo called that evening. Was that sufficient? He asked. Ask the children tomorrow, she said. They will give you an honest answer. Adults in your position rarely hear those. A pause. The specific pause of a man encountering something he does not know how to navigate and is discovering, for what might be the first time, that he does not mind not knowing. I would like to see it, he said. The center. I will come alone. No cars. No men. Elena looked out at the fresh asphalt still visible in the evening light. This man, who never went anywhere without an army, was offering to come alone. Tuesday, she said. 3 o'clock. Don't be late. I have a pottery class at 4 and I will not cancel it for you. She hung up before he could respond. In his office across the city, Yun-po set his phone down on his desk, looked at it for a long moment, then looked at the single white rose sitting in a glass of water on his windowsill, the one his man had reported she kept when she sent everything else back. And for the first time in 20 years, Yun-po smiled at something that had nothing to do with power. Chloe Park did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying was a waste of energy that could be redirected into something useful, something that produced results. Within 48 hours, she had activated every connection her father's political network had accumulated across 20 years of careful relationship building. Journalists, bloggers, 2 city officials who owed Congressman Park favors they had been hoping to avoid repaying indefinitely. The press campaign was precise and cruel. Elena Vance painted as a gold digger, a manipulator, a woman who used a charity gala to deliberately seduce a man 20 years her junior for access to his empire. The age gap weaponized. The silver locks weaponized. The youth center painted as a front. Elena read the first article on Wednesday morning over her coffee, set it down beside her mug, rinsed her cup, got dressed, drove to the youth center. Taught her morning literacy class with the same focused patience she brought to everything that mattered. 2 donors called that afternoon to say they were reconsidering their contributions. A third, a woman Elena had known for 15 years, who had watched the center grow from 1 room and a second-hand pottery wheel, called to say she was doubling her contribution. Unprompted, because real relationships do not fold at the first headline. Elena did not call Yun-poo. She called her lawyer, then her city councilwoman, then the newspaper editor who had owed her a favor since 2019. She went back to work, but she could feel it, the tightening of something around something she had built carefully for 2 decades. The way you feel weather before it arrives. That evening she was locking up when she heard a knock, 3 quiet ones on the glass door. Yun-poo. Standing outside in the dark in a plain dark jacket, no suit, no entourage, no cars visible on the street. A full day early. She unlocked the door, looked at him. It is Monday, she said. I know, he said. I read the articles. She held the door open. He came in. She walked to her small back office and sat at her desk, and gestured to the chair across from it. He sat, looked around, The cork board covered in 20 years of children's drawings and thank you notes. The certificates on the wall. The evidence of a life built entirely in service of something outside herself. "I can make this stop," he said. "Tonight. One call." Elena looked at him over her reading glasses with the patient expression of a woman who has heard this particular offer in various forms her entire life, and has always given the same answer. "I know you can," she said, "and I am going to tell you exactly why you are not going to. But first," she stood and moved to the small kettle in the corner. "I am going to make tea, because this is a conversation that deserves to be had properly, and I do not have difficult conversations without tea." She made 2 cups, set one in front of him, sat back down. "The moment your world solves my problems," she said, wrapping both hands around her mug, "my problems become your world's problems, and I will not have those children's safe space built on that foundation, not one brick of it." He looked at her. "You would rather fight it alone?" "I would rather fight it correctly," she said. "There is a difference." He accepted this, not easily, she could see that, but genuinely, the way a man accepts something when the logic is sound and the person delivering it has earned his respect. They sat for a while, the center quiet around them, the particular piece of a building that has held children all day and is resting. He asked about the center. She told him. 30 years as a school principal, the pension and the savings, the first pottery wheel that wobbled on an uneven floor, the wall of photographs that had been growing for 22 years. He listened completely, filing everything, missing nothing. Then she asked about him. He gave her the curated version first, the one prepared for rooms and journalists and people who wanted access to his world without the weight of actually knowing it. She listened politely, then set down her mug. "That is not what I asked," she said. He looked at her. She looked back, unhurried, waiting with the patience of a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms with people who did not want to tell the truth and had learned that silence was the most effective invitation. And he told her. The noise, constant since he was 19. The age he made the choice that built his world and trapped him inside it simultaneously. The way it never stopped, not with success, not with power, not with anything he had tried in 20 years of trying. The only time it went completely silent was watching her pat her face dry in a ballroom full of people waiting for her to break. He said it plainly, without performance, the way a man speaks when he has stopped managing how he sounds and started simply telling the truth. Elena was quiet for a moment. "Yunpu," she said carefully, "what you felt in that ballroom was not love. It was relief. And you need to understand the difference before either of us takes another step in any direction." He leaned forward. "Then help me understand." She looked at this young, powerful man sitting in her small back office asking her to teach him the difference between love and relief, and felt something she had been carrying alone for a very long time shift slightly in her chest. She almost looked away. She did not. "Come Thursday," she said, 6 o'clock. "There is a community dinner. You will sit with the families. You will not tell anyone who you are. And if you can do that, if you can sit in a room full of ordinary people and simply be a person, then we will talk about the difference." He nodded once. "And Yunpo," she said as he stood, "come hungry. Mrs. Patterson makes the best jollof rice in this city, and I will not have you insulting her by not eating." He left without another word. Elena sat alone in her small office for a long moment after the door closed. Then she looked at the corkboard. At 22 years of thank you notes from children who became adults who came back to tell her what she meant to them. And she asked herself the question she had been avoiding since a man took her hand in a silent ballroom. Not whether he was worth it, whether she was ready to let someone in without losing the woman she had spent 52 years becoming. Yunpo's 3 senior lieutenants requested a meeting, not with him, with her. Yunpo told her she did not have to go. She was already writing down the address. She arrived alone, deep emerald fitted blazer over a silk blouse, tailored dark trousers, reading glasses pushed up in her silver locks, a leather folder under her arm. The specific appearance of a woman who has walked into difficult rooms her entire life and has stopped dressing defensively for them. The meeting room was designed to be uncomfortable. A long table, chairs positioned to make the person across from them feel outnumbered. Lighting that flattered nobody. Elena sat down, set her folder on the table, folded her hands on top of it, and looked at the 3 men across from her with the calm of a woman who has run a school and knows exactly what institutional intimidation looks like and has never once been impressed by it. The oldest lieutenant spoke first. They had done their research on Elena Vance. They were not convinced that her presence in Yunpo's life was an asset rather than a liability. They needed to understand her intentions. Elena listened to every word without interrupting. Then she opened her folder. Inside, a detailed analysis of a financial discrepancy in their legitimate business accounts. $3 million misrouted over 18 months. Not stolen, misrouted. A compounding accounting error that would become a significant legal liability within 6 months if left unaddressed. Found by Elena in one evening using only publicly available company filings. She slid it across the table without commentary. The 3 men looked at it, looked at each other, looked at her. She removed her reading glasses, folded them, set them on the table. "I am not here to impress you," she said. "I am here because your boss asked me to meet you, and I respect him enough to show up. I also respect you enough to bring something useful rather than something decorative." She looked at each of them in turn. "Do you have questions, or shall we all go home?" The silence was absolute. Then the oldest lieutenant, a man who had not shown genuine deference to anyone outside this organization in 15 years, straightened in his chair with the involuntary posture correction of someone who has just been reminded of a standard they forgot they held themselves to. "Miss Vance," he said carefully, "would you be available to consult on one other matter we have been unable to resolve?" Elena opened her folder to a fresh page, picked up her pen. "I charge $300 an hour," she said without looking up. "I do not work weekends. And I do not put my name next to anything I would not put my name next to in daylight." She looked up. "We understand each other?" The 3 men looked at each other again. Then the youngest one, who had not spoken a single word the entire meeting, leaned forward with an expression Elena recognized immediately. The expression of someone who has a real question and has been waiting for the first person in a long time who might actually give them a real answer. "Miss Vance," he said quietly, "how do you do it?" She looked at him. "Do what?" He paused. "Stay that calm, when everything around you is trying to make you anything but." Elena just walked into the most dangerous boardroom in the city, with a leather folder and reading glasses, and left 3 of the most powerful men sitting up straight. If you were Elena, would you have walked into that meeting alone? And gentlemen, if a woman like Elena walked into your world and refused every grand gesture you offered, what would you do to prove you were worth her time? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are watching Christy J's story from tonight. Subscribe and hit that bell. She answered him, not with philosophy, not with the kind of polished wisdom people perform when they want to sound deep, with the truth. "You decide what you are made of before the difficult moment arrives," she said. "Not during it. Never during it. During it, you simply remember the decision you already made." The youngest lieutenant looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly. the nod of someone receiving something they did not expect to need. Elena closed her folder, said goodnight to all three, and left. 3 days later, Congressman Park made his move. A legal challenge to the youth center's zoning permit, technically sound, politically motivated, designed to force closure within 90 days if uncontested. Elena received the notice on a Monday morning at her desk in the small back office surrounded by 22 years of thank you notes. She sat with it for exactly 5 minutes. The specific 5 minutes of a woman who allows herself to feel the full weight of something before she decides what to do with it. Then she made her calls. Lawyer, city councilwoman, newspaper editor. Yunpoo arrived at the center that evening. He sat across from her desk. She showed him the notice. He read it once, set it down. "Let me handle it," he said. "No," she said. "Elena, no." Not sharp, not angry. Final in the way she said everything that was final. The moment your world solves my problems become your world's problems, and I will not have those children's safe space built on that foundation. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You are the most principled person I have ever met. And you are the most capable man I have met in 20 years, she said, who is consistently trying to use that capability in the wrong direction. She looked at him steadily. "Fix that. Then we will talk about what you can offer." He sat back, looked at her for a long time. "You almost walked away from me," he said quietly. "Last Tuesday, after the dinner, I saw it." She did not answer. "Why didn't you?" he asked. The office was very quiet. Elena looked at the corkboard, at 22 years of children who came back as adults to tell her what she meant to them, at the life she had built entirely in service of everything outside herself. "Because I have spent 50 years being strong for everyone else," she said. The words came out quieter than she intended, more honest than she planned. "And for the first time in a very long time, someone is asking me to let them be strong for me." She paused. "And I am trying to learn how to let that in, without losing myself in it." The office was completely still. Yunpoo did not speak, did not offer words for something that did not need them. He simply reached across the desk and covered her hand with his, and stayed there. Elena looked down at his hand over hers, at the specific warmth of it, and felt something she had been keeping locked and bolted for a very long time shift in her chest. Not open, not yet, but move. Like a door that has been closed so long it has forgotten it was built to open. And she did not pull her hand away. 2 weeks before the ambush nobody knew was coming. Yunpoo's men had been rotating through the center on security detail. Present, professional, occupying the edges of the building with the practiced invisibility of people trained to be in spaces without being of them. What nobody anticipated, including Yunpoo, was what happened when you put 6 large men, trained for one kind of world, inside a building that operated on entirely different principles. Elena's principles. She put them to work. Not as security theater, as people. Marcus, 6'4", 17 years in the organization, a face that had cleared rooms on 3 continents, was teaching woodworking 3 afternoons a week. Elena had asked him one Tuesday what he did before, and he told her, and she said simply, "Room 3, Thursday at 2, I will have the materials." No fanfare, no ceremony. Just a door opened and held open long enough for him to walk through it. 2 others were in the literacy program, as students, quietly. No announcement made and none required. One was helping with the after-school cooking program because he mentioned his grandmother taught him, and Elena said, "Wonderful, we start Monday," before he finished the sentence. Yunpoo came unannounced on a Thursday afternoon and found his most feared lieutenant, a man whose name appeared in 3 federal surveillance reports, sitting at a child-sized table, helping a 9-year-old girl read her first full sentence from a picture book. The girl finished, looked up at Marcus. Marcus nodded once, with the absolute seriousness of someone taking this exactly as seriously as it deserved. Yunpoo stood in the doorway. Elena appeared beside him. "Don't," she said quietly, not looking at him, looking at Marcus and the girl. He read his own first full paragraph yesterday morning. He came in before the children arrived to practice. Yunpoo said nothing for a long moment. "I have known that man for 12 years, he said. "I have known him for 3 weeks, Elena said, "and I know he wanted to be a carpenter, and he wanted to read, and nobody ever gave him the space to be both things at the same time." She paused. "You have good men, Yunpoo. They just needed someone to see them without the armor on." He turned to look at her. "Is that what you are doing with me?" She met his gaze. "You are doing that yourself," she said. "I am just not asking you to put it back on." That evening, 3 of his men stayed after hours to help stack chairs and sweep the hall. Nobody asked them to. Yunpoo sat in his car outside and watched through the window. Then he picked up his phone and called his lawyer. About foundations. About legitimate structures. About what it would take to begin moving certain operations into the light permanently. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. This was not a call he had ever received from this number before. "Start the paperwork," Yunpoo said. He watched Elena through the window lock up the center and check the door twice the way she always checked it twice. "There is someone I want to do this right for," he paused, "and I am done making her wait." The night it happened, Elena was alone. She had sent everyone home early, the staff, the volunteers, Marcus, who had offered to stay and whose offer she had declined because she needed an hour of quiet with the zoning documents and her own thoughts. She noticed the signal jam late, too late. Reached for her phone and found it dead. Walked to the window, 3 unmarked cars on the street, men moving toward the building with the specific purpose of people who have been given a job and intend to finish it without complication. She had approximately 90 seconds. She used them to move to the center of the main room, stand still, and decide, with the absolute clarity of a woman who has been deciding things under pressure her entire life, exactly who she was going to be in the next few minutes. 3 men came through the back entrance. They found Elena Vance standing in the center of the room in her deep burgundy fitted turtleneck and dark wide-leg trousers. Reading glasses on, because she had been reviewing documents and she did not take her glasses off for anyone. A letter opener in her right hand, held with the casual authority of a woman who has decided it is the nearest useful object and therefore it will do. She did not scream, did not move, did not reach for anything except her voice. "I need your names," she said. "All 3, before we go any further." The 3 men looked at each other. "I am not asking to threaten you," she said. "I am asking because I do not speak to people whose names I do not know. It is a matter of basic respect." She waited. "I will go first. My name is Elena Vance. I have run this center for 22 years. Now, your turn." The youngest one, 19, holding a weapon older than his understanding of why, said his name before he realized he was saying it. Darius. She looked at him when he said it. Really looked. The way she looked at every young person who came through that door. Completely, without armor. The specific look that said, "I see you," and not just the version of you that you are performing right now. "Darius," she said. "How old are you?" 19, he said. "Sit down," she said, quietly. Exactly the way she had said it to 1,000 young people in 1,000 difficult moments. "You are not doing this tonight." He sat. She kept talking. About the center. About Marcus and the 9-year-old girl and the first paragraph. About what this building was and what it produced. And what the woman who hired them thought of all of it. Which was nothing. Because to Chloe this building was an obstacle, and they were tools. and tools get discarded when the work is done. By the time Yun-poo came through the main door, the second man had lowered his weapon. Only one was still standing. Yun-poo took in the room in one sweep. Elena in the center, reading glasses on, letter opener still in hand. Two men standing, one sitting on the floor. She looked at him over her glasses. "I was handling it," she said. Yun-poo looked at this room, at this woman, at the 19-year-old boy sitting on the floor because she told him to sit down, and he sat. And he understood something that rearranged itself permanently inside him. He did not come here to save her. He came because he could not be anywhere else while she was here. And there was a difference between those two things, that he was only now standing in this room. Yun-poo brought Chloe to a room, not violently, simply ensured she was present and could not leave until he decided otherwise. His world had specific ways of making that happen without anyone raising a voice. He was ready to end this permanently. Marcus called Elena, not because Yun-poo asked him to, because in 3 weeks of woodworking classes and early morning literacy practice, he had developed a loyalty to this woman that operated on its own terms and told him, quietly but absolutely, that she needed to be in that room. Elena arrived in a simple black wrap dress and low heels. She had come from home. She was not dressed for this. She came anyway. She walked in and looked at Chloe. Chloe, who had poured champagne over a crimson gown in a silent ballroom, looked back at Elena with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for retaliation for 6 months and is still somehow not prepared for the form it takes. Elena looked at Yun-poo. One look. He stepped back. Because he had learned, in 6 months of being in rooms with this woman, what that look meant. It meant she had this, and she did not need him to have it for her. She pulled up a chair, sat directly across from Chloe, set her clutch on the table, folded her hands. The silence stretched. Elena let it stretch, the way she let all silences stretch that needed stretching. Then, one question, almost gently. "What are you actually afraid of, Chloe?" Chloe stared at her. Elena waited. It took a long time. But eventually, unevenly, in pieces, the way things come out when they have been held in too long, Chloe spoke. Not the cruelty of the Gala. Something underneath it, older, more ordinary. A woman told since childhood that her value lived in her face and her connections and her ability to hold a powerful man's attention, who looked across a ballroom and saw a woman 20 years older, pulling focus without a single effort, and understood in one terrible moment that she had been building the wrong thing her entire life and did not know how to build anything else. Elena listened to every word. When Chloe finished, Elena was quiet for a moment. "You owe me a handkerchief," she said. "It was vintage silk, and it is ruined." A beat, then, "Stand in front of those cameras tomorrow and tell the truth. Not for me, for the version of yourself that exists underneath all of this performance. Because that woman, the one who is actually afraid, deserves better than what you have been doing in her name." Chloe looked at her for a long time. Something shifted. Not transformation, the beginning of something. A crack in a wall that had needed cracking for a long time. Yun-poo watched from the doorway and made a decision that had nothing to do with Chloe. He looked at Elena across that room, this woman who came in a black wrap dress from her own home because Marcus called, and she came and understood that what he had been calling peace was something more specific. It was the feeling of being in the presence of someone completely and permanently themselves. And he had been trying to hold on to that feeling from the outside. What he needed to do what he was finally ready to do was build it in himself, with her beside him, not in front of him. 6 months later, Chloe held the press conference. Imperfect, halting, true enough. The political will behind the zoning challenge evaporated within a week of it. The machinery Congressman Park had built to dismantle Elena Vance, quietly dismantling itself once its architect became a liability. The youth center expanded. A new wing, funded by a foundation that Elena spent 3 weeks reviewing before she agreed to accept the money. She named it after her mother. Yunpo agreed before she finished the sentence. Marcus received his carpentry certification on a Tuesday morning. Elena sat in the front row in a deep cobalt blue structured dress and low heels, with a bouquet of white roses she had brought herself because she had always loved white roses and because she was done waiting for people to bring her things she could bring herself. She clapped the loudest. Marcus looked at her from the stage and nodded once. The nod of a man who has been seen properly for the first time and intends to spend the rest of his life being worth it. 3 others followed. She attended every ceremony. Darius was enrolled at the center. Elena knew his name the first day. She knew everyone's name. Yunpo had been transitioning slowly, carefully, with Elena's counsel and her lawyer and her complete refusal to sign anything that wasn't exactly right. 2 lieutenants resisted. She made them lunch one Saturday and explained compound interest over soup, and they came around before the bowls were empty. He asked her on a Tuesday. Not at a gala, not with something that cost more than most people's cars. In the youth center. After the last pottery class of the evening. 7 children who absolutely refused to leave, sitting in the doorway with the focused attention of people watching something important happen. Elena was in her deep burgundy fitted turtleneck and dark, wide-leg trousers. Reading glasses pushed up in her silver locks. Clay on her hands and on one cheek, where she had touched her face without thinking. Yunpo waited until the last child had put away their clay. Then he crossed the room and got down on one knee, on the floor of the building she had built from her pension and her savings, and 30 years of believing that children deserved somewhere safe to become themselves. He held up a ring. Not the largest thing in the world, specifically chosen. A deep red stone the color of the gown she wore the night everything changed, set in a simple band. Something she would wear while she taught pottery. Something that belonged on hands that work. Elena looked at it, looked at him, looked at the children visible in the doorway pretending not to watch. "Get up," she said. "Your trousers will get clay on them." He stayed on one knee. Elena Vance. She looked at this man, 38 years old, in the process of becoming someone worth being, chosen her not because she was convenient or impressive or filled a gap, but because she was entirely and permanently herself, and he had decided that being near that quality was worth rearranging everything. She felt something she had given everyone around her for 50 years come back in. And let it. "Yes," she said, "but I am keeping my name." The children erupted from the doorway. Marcus, who was supposed to have gone home an hour ago, appeared from the woodworking room with the expression of a man who absolutely stayed on purpose. He began to clap. Elena put the ring on her own finger, looked at her clay-covered hands with the red stone catching the light. Then she looked at Yunpo, still rising from one knee with clay on his trouser, exactly as she predicted. "I told you," she said. He looked down at his trouser, then at her, and laughed a real one, unguarded. The specific laugh of a man whose noise has finally, permanently, gone quiet. That evening, Elena sat alone in the center after everyone had gone, ring on her finger, clay still between her knuckles. The last light of the evening coming through the windows and falling across the name on the new wing wall. Her mother's name, her name below it, Founder. She thought about the woman who poured champagne over a crimson gown, 6 months ago, in a ballroom full of people waiting for her to break. And she smiled. Not because she won, because she never once, not for a single second, considered losing. Final image. Elena's clay-covered hands in her lap, the red stone catching the last evening light, her mother's name on the wall, hers beneath it. Fade to black. Elena Vance, 52 years old, silver locks, clay on her hands, a ring the color of the gown she wore the night everything changed. If you were Elena, would you have said yes when he asked, or would you have made him wait longer? And gentlemen, if a woman like Elena walked into your world, refused your diamonds, fixed your books, and still walked away from every grand gesture, what would you do to prove you were worth her time? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are watching Christy J's story from tonight. Subscribe and hit that bell. We will see you in the next story.